also when the war started in June 1941. Our town was in flames because the Germans were shooting from one side and the Russians were shooting from the other one. From the west, the Germans, from the east, the Russians. So we had to flee because our town was completely in flames.
Welcome, everyone, to Family Comes First. I'm Vincent J. Russo.
And I'm Kim Burke. Thank you for joining us today. The Holocaust was among the darkest of hours in our history, and as school children, everybody learns the dates and the facts about the Holocaust, but we may not have had the opportunity to put real faces and voices to the stories. And Vincent, you are so fortunate to know two Holocaust survivors who just happen to be amazing people at the same time.
Eric and Hedy Page are two individuals whose lives were changed forever by Hitler's Nazi Germany. They are very dear friends of mine, and I am sure they will touch you in ways that you have never been touched before. Before we meet the Page family, we have the pleasure of being joined in our resource center by two men who have been involved in remembering the Holocaust in their own special ways. It is a privilege to welcome Monsignor Donald Beckman, who is a pastor at St. Ignatius Martyr Church in Long Beach, where we live, as well as the director of ecumenical and interreligious affairs for the Diocese of Rockville Center. He was a founding member of the board of directors of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. Welcome, Monsignor.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And in keeping with the theme of family, our second guest is my son, Dante Russo. Dante wrote a musical entitled The City of Silence, which premiered at the Boston Center for the Arts in 2003. The musical focused on how families, especially children, were impacted by the Holocaust.
Monsignor Beckman, how did you get involved with the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County?
Those of us who are active and involved Christians must be very involved in working against anti-Semitism and certainly in remembering the Holocaust.
And the Holocaust Memorial is in Glen Cove?
It's in Glen Cove. Was founded in part through the efforts of Bishop McGann and Rabbi Myron Fenster, who were the two original founders. They put the board together, and the center has been growing and developing, in part with help from the county as well.
Dante, you wrote a musical.
Yes.
The City of Silence. Tell us about the story.
The City of Silence is a fully sung-through musical, and it takes place during World War II Nazi Germany, and it centers around a family, a mother named Paulina, who live in Dresden, Germany. And then through many twists and turns, the family actually end up in a concentration camp in Act 2. The concentration camp does not have a name to represent all the different concentration camps, as well as there's a male authority figure in the show who represents all the Nazis.
I know you went to Holy Trinity High School, and you actually, as a sophomore, I believe, your second year there, wrote a one-act play that has become this musical now. Where does a sophomore in high school get the idea to write such an ambitious musical about such a topic that most kids would be, I don't want anything to do with that, in a musical as well?
A lot of reading, a lot of research online, but also when I research projects, I love to just get immersed in the topic, and so I did a lot of traveling. I visited many Holocaust memorials and museums. I went up to Boston to the Holocaust Memorial there. I visited the Holocaust Museum in D.C. and in London. I visited the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. And my biggest trip, which was life-changing, was visiting Auschwitz in Poland. And that experience, it was just incredible to walk the grounds and to physically be where, you know, like you see Schindler's List and you know, it's very, very cinematic, but to actually be there and to be in the space.
People walked.
It's very humbling, and it was an incredible experience that I'll never forget.
I bet.
Yeah.
Hedy and Eric Page shared with us that, you know, he last saw his mother behind a fence in a concentration camp, a barbed-wired fence, and you have a scene in your show. And Hedy and Eric went up to Boston to see the musical, and Hedy later told me it was the first time he ever cried about the Holocaust. It brought back that memory of the last time he saw his mother. Monsignor, the message that we never be silenced, how how do we ensure that future generations will never forget?
I think there are two aspects to that. One is to recognize the uniqueness of the Shoah. Often we use the Hebrew name, the Holocaust, precisely to help announce that uniqueness, because for all of the other genocides, for all of the other attacks on people, the hatred in the world, there was something very desperately unique about the Shoah, in that the entire mechanism of a state was used to wipe out one complete population from that state. So there's something unique about that. But at the same time, and this is one of the messages of the Holocaust Tolerance Center, we can learn from that about all forms of hatred, all forms of even just dislike of people because of their race, their ethnic background, their religion, or whatever.
You'll see a lot of pictures throughout this particular show from the museum, and a picture does tell 1,000 words. So what does having this wonderful center here on Long Island mean for us?
Well, I think several things. I think one, exactly as you say, it presents a place where people can go, individuals can go, school groups can go, study groups of adults can go to learn. Not only to see the pictures, which, as you say, are very powerful.
Compelling, very much so.
But sometimes I think even more important, the opportunity of meeting survivors, of being able to speak with people who went through it and who did psychologically and religiously, as well as physically, survive it. I think for many of them, from what I hear them say, it gives them the opportunity of knowing that their experience, as horrific as it was, still could lead to something positive if they're able to get their story across, if people remember and if people learn from it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Monsignor Donald Beckman, my son Dante Russo, and sharing your perspective on the Holocaust and how to remember and honor the people who were lost. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we will sit down with the Page family and hear their stories of surviving the Holocaust, raising a family here in the United States, while never losing their unwavering spirit. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
So when the war started in June 1941, our town was in flames because the Germans were shooting from one side and the Russians were shooting from the other one. From the west, the Germans, from the east, the Russians. So we had to flee because our town was completely in flames. And there were four of us. Myself, my mother, my aunt, and my uncle. My aunt was sickly at that time. We think she had cancer. A horse and wagon drove by with a family and their stuff all loaded into that wagon. They saw us. They knew us. They stopped. They said, "We can't take all of you, but we'll take the sick one." And that was the last time we saw my aunt. And we were told not to go any further, but stay in a larger city, because in the small towns, the Jews were picked up or surrounded there and killed right there. And there was quite a bit of mass killing going on in the small towns. So we stayed there, and after about 2 or 3 weeks of German occupation, they divided the city into a Jewish quarter, and they called it the ghetto. And we stayed there close to 3 years. By the time we left from the ghetto, I was 18. And from the ghetto, they transferred us to a concentration camp called Stutthof. It's right on the Russian border, on this Polish border. And in that camp, the men were separated from the women. And that's the last place I saw my mother alive. From there, we were transported to Dachau. The food was very, very poor. We used to get about a slice or so of bread in the morning with a cup of coffee. And for dinner, you usually got another piece of bread and another soup. That soup might have had 2 potatoes in it. Okay, and that was our food. Well, we knew what was going on. I mean, especially when we were still in Dachau or in Stutthof, the crematorium ovens were working. And we knew exactly what was going on. The important thing, really, that really made me survive was hate. Because I hated so strongly. Because I saw what was happening, looking at the people, you know, in the camp. You knew today who was going to die by tomorrow. Just the way they acted, just the way they were moving. And as the army was progressing closer to Dachau, they took us from the labor camp into Dachau for one night, and then we were put on a march. It was called the Death March. We marched for 4 or 5 days with hardly any food. Whoever fell behind, they were guard dogs. If you couldn't make it, because even with the guard dogs, most of them were just dying there, either shot or what have you. We walked one more day. They stopped at that evening, and a group of us were close to an empty barn. So that group went into the barn. The rest slept outside because only so many people could get in there. We were lucky to get in. Well, the next morning we woke up. There were no more guards. And we looked out, walked out, looked around, no guards. That was the first day of liberation.
We heard the Chancellor speaking on the radio, and he said, "Long live Austria." I don't remember his exact words. And then there was music, and my parents were very quiet. And after that, things changed. Children know things. They don't have to be told things, but they feel the atmosphere changing. I wasn't allowed to go near the window, and the world felt dark. And there was screaming in the streets, and people broke into our house. And I remember that they were pounding on our door, and my mother quickly put my brother and me into a closet. I remember the feeling of sitting on thick pillows because they had been stored there, and the hammering outside. And then they broke through the door, and they asked for my father. And we didn't hear any. We heard noise, but my brother and I were in the closet. What did happen during that night was that neighbors from across the street, there were 3 girls, or 2 girls, young women, and they had a boyfriend who was in the SS, in the stormtroopers, or the army, one of those which had the uniforms. And they told them to rescue my father, and he came to the door, and he said to my mother, "What does your husband look like?" And she said, "He's short, he has red hair," and gave his name, Jacob Kellman. And he ran off, and he ran through the streets looking for where groups of men were being gathered. And he asked for Jacob Kellman, and got my father, and he walked through the streets with him through the night until he could get him safely into a friend's apartment. And I'd like to tell that, and my father came home early that morning. I'd like to tell this because there were these amazing people who risked their lives for people they didn't know. And I remember at that time the word Jude, which meant Jew in German, was very terrifying to me because it had been used with such venom. And when she said to Israelite children, it sort of gave me such a knowledge of what words can do. The N-word in America. And I always felt that we don't know people and then we can hurt them. And that was really what I learned from Eric. Because when people say to him, how could people do to others what they did to the Jews or to others? He always says, it's very easy. All you have to do is to consider them subhuman. All you have to do is to decide that you don't know them, that they're not like you.
We are now joined by my good friends Eric and Hedy Page, as well as their daughter, Joni. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And also joining us, your son, Kenny, remotely. How you doing, Ken?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure.
The voice, the disembodied voice.
That's
it's
right.
Wonderful.
I just have to start with thanking you for sharing your stories of surviving the Holocaust. It's just unbelievable to me that it could ever happen, and it did happen, and it's so incredibly sad that it happened. And I'm asking you to share with us, how did you move forward? Eric, you shared the day of liberation. You had no family, no possessions. Where did you go?
We had some far-off relative in the United States, and they sent us tickets to come here.
Ah, okay.
We ended up in New York, and from there we went to Great Neck.
Hedy, I guess the question for you, your trip to the States was very different.
Yes,
your family
right.
fleeing
Yes.
and you ending up in Panama.
Right, right.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, my father, when Hitler came in March into Vienna, and my father immediately began to write all over the world, anybody we knew, if they could send us visa, because he knew what was coming. And the threats had been there, but so many people weren't paying attention to them. And he went from embassy to embassy, from office to office, and around my birthday in August, we got a visa from Panama. And I firmly believe that we were saved by Panama.
And by your uncle.
And by my uncle who lived there, yes, yes, yes.
Now, how did you two meet? First of all, Hedy, you have a smile that lights up a room. When you smile, you just are a wonderful, beautiful person.
Inner spirit.
And it really, but how did you meet then? You came from two different stories. You survived the same kind of thing. How did you meet each other?
We both didn't fall in love with America. And we know we wanted to leave. And we went from one segregation to another segregation when we saw what was happening to people of color here. We had gone south and seen that world, and it colored our picture of the United States. There was no Martin Luther King, there was no civil liberties, there was nothing. And we decided we wanted to go to Israel. And we met at a camp which taught us how to work in a commune, in a kibbutz. I learned to clean toilets, he learned to build buildings, and then very slowly we fell in love with America, and we never did go to
So
Israel.
how about each other?
Oh, that too.
Oh,
That happened rapidly. That happened very rapidly. We met in the summer camp. We met in the summer camp in 1948, and we were married on the last day of 48.
Well, there's a love story here. Joni and Kenny, I understand your father didn't talk much about the Holocaust, actually, until fairly recently. Did you know that your parents were Holocaust survivors when you were growing up? Joni, you want to first?
Oh, sure. I think I knew it from the moment I knew anything. You know, the Holocaust has been part of my growing up. It was part of my understanding of the world, I think, from my earliest years, because it was always like a dark cloud off to the corner. And it shaped my view of the world. It shapes my view of who people are and what people are capable of. It shapes the work that I do. So I don't think there ever was a time I didn't know about it. And I think it not being spoken about maybe made it bigger in my mind. But it showed up sideways in various ways.
Sure. And Kenny, what was that like for you, knowing your parents were survivors?
I remember being in the car with my dad when he would tell little bits of stories about the Holocaust, and I remember that what I went through was that I felt like I needed to help him. like I needed to be a really good son and know how to listen and talk. And I felt profoundly inadequate to that task because I just felt a pit of fear and darkness that was so big. And I felt like, but then I can't be there for him. So I just didn't know how to be around that. But I just want to share one thing that my dad said to me that was amazing and will never leave me. Because I said to him, I said, I don't know if I could have been as brave as you. I don't know if I had what it takes or if I have what it takes to have been able to survive this like you did. And he said to me, he said, you can't ask yourself that question. Because you could never know until you're there.
That's right.
So don't ask yourself that question, because it's something you would never know until it happened, and God forbid it should ever happen to you. But that was so empowering to think that I could stop asking myself that question, and that was just, one of the many gifts from my dad.
An inspiration, for sure.
Let you off the hook finally.
Yeah.
Now, Eric, I know that in the last few years you actually have gone back to find some of your family members to see if people are still, if they're survived and what happened to them. What happened there? What did you discover?
We tried to go back. We did go back, and we went through. You see, my mother had two sisters who lived in Germany, but being a child, you're not so much interested in relatives who live far away. Sure. So I really had no contact with them. My mother used to correspond with them. But I didn't know. I didn't know their married name. So I don't know whom they married or where they lived. So we tried going back and tried to trace them, which was just about impossible.
Now, Hedy, I know that you have beautiful artwork hanging in New York City museums. Out of all of this, you became a painter. How does that happen? Is that what you need to do? Is that what comes out of you, inside of you? Why painting?
Drawing was such a weapon for me because I had a teacher who believed everybody could draw. That was first, second, and third grade in Vienna. I just always tended to want to draw people. And once Ken, who's a therapist, he did a session with me when I was already an adult and after I'd been painting for years. And he said, why do you only do people? And I realized for the first time that I thought that if I show that people really exist, that they're each individuals, I only do real people, then prejudice would have to disappear if people could see real people. So I was always drawing real people. But I hadn't known why until then.
Sure. I just want to share with our audience Anna's legacy, the beauty of our special children, your drawings, Hedy, of children with disabilities, and this book being in honor of your mother, Anna, so important. Creating that awareness that, over 6 million Jews were murdered, but there were also children with disabilities that were lost in the Holocaust. So quite an important book that's been published by our good friend, our New York State Assemblyman, Harvey Wiesenberg. So we thank you for this, the two of you. And I just want to close with a conversation I had with Eric, because in the video, Eric, you made a strong statement that it was hate that allowed you to get through the day, that you hated what was happening. I just want to share that conversation with our audience because it's so important to all of us as a society.
We had a neighbor next door to us, and we became very friendly. And we went to their house, and he said, Eric, how do you really feel about being in my home? Because you knew my background, and I did. He was on a U-boat during the war. And here's what I told him. I said, look, if you would have done something to me or anybody around it that I've seen, I said, you wouldn't be alive now. I said, but since I don't, if I discriminate to people just because of a nationality or a color, I would be just as low as they were. And I said, nobody would get me down to that level.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you all for being here today, sharing your stories. And Joni and Kenny, you're just very lucky to have your parents.
That's true.
Absolutely.
And we're so lucky to have them.
Let's now go to Monsignor McNamara for a spiritual reflection.
There have been reports and even high-profile cases of people who deny that the Holocaust ever even happened. The testimony of Eric and Hedy puts such nonsense to rest. Whatever motivation people may have to deny the Holocaust, one benign interpretation is to say that they simply cannot take in all the evil involved. I was deeply moved by the calm and objective way that Eric and Hedy recount their experiences. Somehow they found a way to live with the horror that had formed their lives. Even though Eric says he survived through hatred, he has lived a good life all of these years despite such atrocities early on. Both Eric and Hedy are to be admired for their perseverance and their strength. Their testimony is also a challenge to all of us to fight for justice, especially in places like Darfur in our world today. Compassion can easily be replaced by numbness in the face of so much suffering. Outrage at injustice can quickly degenerate into self-defeating capitulation in the face of such evil. Let us never deny the horror and the evil of the Holocaust, and let us be on fire for justice and the dignity of all human beings so that such evil will never happen again.
If you'd like to learn more about Anna's legacy, the beauty of our special children, the book by Eric and Hedy Page, made possible by a grant from Assemblyman Harvey Wiesenberg, you can visit www.teresafoundation.org. Have a fantastic day, Vincent.
Thank you, Kim, and have a great day as well. And thank you all for joining us. And remember, family truly does come first.